Okay, so we've covered existing schemes, future schemes, woodland. What about renewables, Ed? It's obviously a really hot topic as well at the moment, with carbon and everything else, renewable energy, the commitments the government's made. Could you talk us through the opportunities that are out there in regards to those?
So the beauty about solar is that it is scalable very quickly. We can roll out huge amounts of new solar in a short space of time. So that's where the current focus is at the moment, along with storage. Energy storage is vital as more and more renewables or renewable electricity from wind and solar come on stream. Then you need those batteries in there to help flatten the curves.
Okay, so on the solar, there's obviously a great push for green energy. How does that sort of manifest itself in terms of commercial arrangements?
Okay, so it's all about the grid. Everybody sort of likes the idea of having a solar park and putting 100 acres, 200 acres, 500 acres into a solar park, but without the grid, it's just not possible. You need grid, you need planning, and you need land rights essentially to make it happen. But without the grid, you really can't do anything.
Yep.
So if we assume for a moment that you've got all of those in place, you've got grid, you've got planning, you've got funding, then the commercials, assuming that you go down the traditional option and lease route, you can be looking at maybe a 3-year option in the first instance, and there might be an option fee anywhere from, I've seen £1,000, I've seen £25,000. All deals are different for sure. And then the option period will allow that developer to go away and get planning permission for their project. And assuming they get it and everything's acceptable, then they will exchange the lease at that point. Rents for solar, there's a wide range you might expect. The range typically would be £900 an acre to maybe £1,100 an acre. Some are at 800, some are at 1,200. There's a range because every site is different. But that's typically the rental range we're in. A bit like the woodland carbon scheme, there's a revenue link as well. If you've got a long-term lease of 30 years, you need that link to the future. So having a revenue rent, turnover rent element of maybe 5, 6, 7% will make sure that if anything fundamental happens to the solar park, which increases its productivity, if you like, throughout the term, then the landlord benefits from that. We're also seeing the return of capital payments and lease premiums. So something to be aware of when you're doing your negotiations. Batteries obviously take a lot less room. So rather than it being 200 acres for a solar park, we're talking 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 6 or 7 acres for a battery site, for a storage site. And rents for those are typically paid per megawatt, so maybe £1,000 or £2,000 per megawatt. And you can be looking at 50 to 100 megawatt projects on that 5 or 6 acres. Okay. So significant rents available. And the next thing that's coming is synchronous condensers in certain grid areas, which helps balance the grid and helps balance frequency, and they are as lucrative. So there's a number of different technologies out there which farmers have got the opportunity and landowners have got the opportunity to use their land for. Ultimately, you need to involve your professional team. You need your solicitor, your accountant, your existing lender, if the land is subject to mortgage, to be part of the project from day one. And if they're all on board and you've taken the good advice, then these schemes are great diversification. It's a good hedge against BPS loss. And ultimately, we can produce this green electricity that we need to try and combat climate change.
But just picking up on what we discussed earlier, there's tax implications similarly to tree planting for renewable schemes as well, presumably.
There are. Everything I said before about moving land around, making sure it's in the right place, making sure you're dealing with the income in the right company or the right partnership, wherever you want it to be. That's exactly where the accountant comes in to give you that advice and make sure you structure things properly.
And also just linking it back again to carbon rights effectively, or the right to sequester carbon or sell carbon that's captured. That's something you're now seeing in solar arrangements going forward, isn't it?
It's something that's just appearing sort of now. We haven't been too worried about it up to now, but certainly now landlords are asking if they can reserve the right to use the natural capital if carbon sequestration opportunities present themselves. How do we retain that rather than letting it away with the solar park? And we've come up with a few novel ideas as to how you can do that, how you can permit it under the user clause, but then share revenue in different ways. So yeah, it's there's always something new, and the number of them that we're doing now, we get the ability to thrash all these things out and reach agreement, which is great. Of course, the one thing we haven't touched on much is hydrogen yet. That's coming down the rails at us at a fast rate of knots. In order for the electrolysis to happen, to split the water molecules to produce that hydrogen, you need a lot of electricity, and that has to be green electricity, it has to be renewable. So whilst we need huge amounts of new solar and wind generation capacity just to electrify our existing economy, when we start moving to hydrogen vehicles and maybe biomethane in the first instance, we need a lot of electricity. We can't overstate the amount we need.
Okay.
And that's a canter through it.
Thanks very much, Ed. Thank you, Lottie. I think that's probably a good place to bring our virtual farm walk to a conclusion. Summing up, I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot of opportunity out there, there's a lot of change happening, and we would suggest to landowners, farmers, that this change isn't necessarily a bad thing, it can be a good thing as well. There is so much opportunity out there in terms of schemes, renewables, carbon sequestration, all the things that these guys have just outlined. What I do appreciate is it's complicated, it's still unknown to a degree, and really what we would like to say to you guys, our viewers, is get in touch with us, because this is what we do, this is what Lottie does, this is what Ed does. We'll guide you through it, we're good at it. So please try and embrace it, pick up the phone, and let's see the greatest change in UK agricultural policy since the Second World War, as some people have termed it, as a good thing. And can I encourage you to watch our next video in the series as well when it's publicised and released. Thank you.